Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Patrick Meyer, and together with my colleague Jen Zemke, we are the co-founders of the Crisis Mappers Network. So welcome to our Crisis Mappers webinar series. We've been very fortunate to collaborate with our colleagues at Geotime to bring you these seminars, almost 20 now, over the past 3 years alone. So with that, I want to hand it over to my colleague at Geotime, Adil, for a quick overview, and then we'll introduce our guest speaker today, Mr. Guilhem Ravier from the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you again for joining us, and Adil, over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Patrick. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect, thank you. I just want to take care of a few housekeeping items before we started. First and foremost, I just want to let you know that this session will be recorded, the audio and video, and we will be posting it up on the Crisis Mapper series at a later point in time. Secondly, I guess if you can hear this is kind of redundant, but the audio instructions are underneath the webinar information panel. However, if you are with somebody else in the same room and they can't log in, just please look at the audio recording information down in the bottom left-hand panel where it says webinar information. And we will be having a Q&A session after the presenter speaks. However, if at any point in time you need to communicate with us, or you would like to ask a question, please don't hesitate to use the group chat on the extreme left. Your microphones will be muted throughout the session, so that is the way we will be able to communicate with one another. And without further ado, I'll turn it back to Patrick. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Adil. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. So the way these webinars go basically is we have guest speakers who contribute their area of expertise that are directly relevant to the work that many of our members, our 5,000 plus members of the Crisis Mappers Network, and this is to really be in line with our mandate and mission at the Crisis Mappers Network, is to catalyze information sharing, collaboration, and lessons learned. So with that, the setup is 20 minutes to our guest speaker to present the topic today, and then followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. So just to introduce our speaker for today, this is again Mr. Guilhem Ravier, who is the head of the Protection of the Civilian Population Unit, which is part of the Protection Division at the International Committee of the Red Cross, headquartered in Geneva. And this unit is specifically responsible for the development of relevant policies and methodologies regarding the protection of civilians and persons who are, quote, hors de combat, based on multidisciplinary approaches. And these protection activities can either aim to remind the authorities in question of their obligations under international humanitarian law and other applicable norms, or to reduce a particular population's exposure to the threats and therefore support their resilience in the face of crisis. Mr. Ravier graduated with a degree in international law at the universities of Bordeaux in France and Warwick in the UK, and also in politics at the University of Bordeaux. He then completed a master's degree in emergency humanitarian aid with a specialization in international humanitarian law from the University of Aix-en-Provence in France. And he's worked with the ICRC for almost 15 years now, and both headquartered and on missions as a field delegate in Colombia, in Liberia, and in Afghanistan as well, and was served as a protection coordinator in Guinea-Conakry, as well as Indonesia, Iraq, and again in Colombia. And before that, he worked in Bosnia and Herzegovina as a liaison officer with both UNHCR and for NATO as a lead international civilization force representative, as also as the head of field office for UNHCR. So he comes with an incredible amount of experience and expertise to this particular topic. I had the good fortune of meeting him in person last week when I presented some of the work that we were doing at the Crisis Mappers Network and our members in a workshop in Geneva. So Guilhem, thank you very, very much for your time, your expertise, your experience, and the work that you've done on these new protocols that the ICRC has just released are incredibly relevant and important for the work that we want to do in this Crisis Mapper space. So thank you again, and over to you.
thank you very much, Patrick, for this introduction. I hope everybody is hearing me well. Thanks a lot for the proposal to organize this webinar. It's really a great opportunity for us to share these documents with a community of actors with whom we've developed recently some relations, but it's still something very new for us. So we are extremely happy to have the opportunity to continue this dialogue. So I will be presenting the standards, which we, as Patrick mentioned, we presented them. We really officially launched a new document last week in Geneva. There will be some further events in different parts of the world throughout the year to present them locally and hopefully to support the efforts of the protection actors for their effective implementation. So as you said, and as everybody can hear from my accent, I'm French, and we have a particular way of speaking English. So I hope you will bear with my accent. You will also see that I am not the world champion in the elaboration of PowerPoint presentation, so it's fairly basic, but I hope it will be a useful tool to continue or to start the dialogue, a basis for the question and answers after my presentations. And I also recommend that all of you have a look at the recent blog post by Patrick last week. On his blog there was a very interesting blog post putting the standards into perspective from the perspective of the crisis mappers. What do these standards mean, and what are some of the challenges for their implementation? So I will also try to refer to some of the comments Patrick made in my presentation. So this is the second edition of the standards. The first edition was published in 2009, and the idea behind this second edition was to take stock of some of the development in the field of protection. So now we have 59 standards and guidelines. The standards are seen as really the indispensable part with which everyone should comply, and the guidelines are some useful reference for all actors, but that may have different relevance depending on the particular activities and the particular mandate of specific protection actors. And with these standards and guidelines, there are some explanatory notes that try to capture the main challenges and dilemma, give some practical examples, and try to put each standard and guidelines into perspective. First of all, mostly for those of you who are new to this field, you may wonder what are we talking about when we talk about protection? Who are we protecting, or who is supposed to be protected? So there is an official definition of protection, which you see now on your screen, and basically what you should remember is that humanitarian and human rights protection actors, we are not the ones who are effectively responsible for the protection of the civilians. The ones who bear the first responsibility are the states and the non-state armed actors who are parties to the conflict or to a situation of violence. They are the ones who have the essential duty to protect those who are not taking part in hostilities, the civilian population. So our role as protection actors is essentially to undertake activities to ensure that these primary duty bearers comply with their obligations, and to ensure therefore that in the end the civilian population is effectively protected. This is an important point, and it's included in the standards in chapter 2 in particular, where we talk about the protection architecture. It's essential for all protection actors to understand well who is responsible for what, to respect, to have a good understanding of the different responsibilities, and not to misunderstand the role of each actor, and in particular not to think that it's this direct protection is the role of protection protection actors. Why did we need standards? I will very briefly introduce the standards. I think it's important to put them into perspective, and then I will give some more details about the new chapter or the redeveloped chapter on data management and the use of new technologies. So why do we need standards? First of all, because protection work is fairly sensitive. We are talking about documenting possible violations of international law, therefore talking with the victims or with witnesses of these violations, talking also with the perpetrators, trying to make some practical recommendations in order to ensure better outcomes for the population, and therefore it's quite sensitive. There is great perspective to do more harm than good if these activities are not well implemented or if some basic safeguards are not implemented. So it's essential to ensure that we minimize the potential adverse consequences, and that at the same time we try to ensure the maximum positive impact. The idea, therefore, is to encourage a professional approach to these kind of activities, and it's not this. This is also essential to stress. The idea is not to limit the range and the diversity of actors. It's not. This document is not aimed at gatekeeping. We don't want to prevent new actors to join us. On the contrary, we think it can be very useful to gain broader competence and expertise in this field, but we want that all those who are interested comply with some basic standards, so that errors that were made in the past by all of us are not repeated, and that we can take stock of the existing body of practice and experience. So that's the key reasons behind these standards. These standards also, they are not as such an ICRC document. We've led the process over the past 5 years, but it's not an ICRC owned document. It represents a consensus amongst the large community of protection actors, both from the UN and from NGOs background, and both from humanitarian and human rights. So we've tried to be as inclusive as possible. We hope we've managed to include the views of all the concerned actors, and these documents in principle represent the consensus amongst protection actors. And in the revision of the standards in this new document, we've also included the so-called voluntary and technical communities, the crisis mappers. We've sought to include the view of these emerging actors over the past years, in particular since the first edition in 2009. There has been a very important development in technologies, but also in the use of these new technologies for disaster response and for protection action. So we wanted to ensure that we would take include the opinion and the views of the volunteer and technical community. We hope we managed to do so. There was in particular a workshop organized in Washington last summer, but there was also many bilateral consultations and discussions. So this document goes beyond the community of protection actors or the traditional protection actors. We've sought to include also these actors, and we look forward also to use these standards in the future. It is still a work in progress. The technologies will not stop their development now. There will be still new tools, but also new ideas practically new methodologies to practically implement these tools in order to contribute to disaster response and protection activities in armed conflict. So there is no doubt that these documents will continue being updated in the future, and therefore we will need to maintain our dialogue. For whom the standards are are intended, obviously, for humanitarian and human rights protection actors, but also other actors that may not be directly involved in protection, but may have some interest, and that obviously concerns the voluntary and technical communities. You will see that the document is a bit arid and complex. It's probably not the most exciting reading you will have in the coming weeks. It may be a bit complicated sometimes to get into. So there is no need, as also Patrick points in his blog post from last week, there is certainly a need to put these standards into a more direct, practical perspective for the voluntary and technical community, for directly responding to your needs. So this is also a discussion that is in the air, or that has been in the air for quite a few months. The idea of using also these standards as a starting point for the development of more specific code of conduct or practical guidance for the crisis mappers, something that would more directly implement the standards from a technical perspective. So we hope to be able also to contribute to this reflection in the future. Very briefly now, so in this revised edition, most of all we've addressed three elements of the 2009 edition. First of all, what we call the protection strategies, the need for all protection actors to have clear strategies based on an assessment of the situation with some clear objectives, and also to endeavor to design some indicators in order to be able to monitor the impact of our activities. So this is there were some elements in the first version, but we've managed to put some more in this new edition. There is also the question of dialogue with peacekeepers and other multinational forces, and also dialogue with armed non-state actors. This is something we had not managed to reach consensus on in the first edition, but the reflection progressed since then, and there are some standards addressing these issues. And finally, and this is the point I will be introducing now, redeveloping the chapter on data management and new technologies in order to take into account the development of technologies and also the practical experience of using these technologies in the response to various crises in the past years. So this is very briefly the way the information is organized in the new document, with seven chapters, and the ones in red are the ones that have been most substantially redeveloped or rewritten. And now I will get to this chapter. So now it is chapter 6 regarding managing sensitive information. So first of all, we recognize that new technologies and new methodologies, taking into account these technologies, bring some opportunities and challenges. First of all, well, we can collect information from afar using either some networks of volunteers or even the victims themselves on the ground, contributing information on the situation by phone, by email, and by many other vectors. There is the use of satellite imagery and of mapping tools to plot this information and to contribute to the documentation of the violation. There is the use of crowdsourcing, both for the collection and the processing of the information by networks of volunteers. And there is obviously crisis mapping, where which can contribute to the visualization and the analysis of the information, but also to the a more effective and efficient response to the needs of the population on the ground. The opportunities, well, first of all, a greater response capacity, a direct contact and a direct dialogue with the victims on the ground. There is the question if these are a substitute for access. In our perspective from the ICRC, obviously not. We want, for us, it's essential to have a direct contact with the victims on the field, but there is no doubt that the new technologies can bring about additional contacts or an additional perspective, in particular in situations where access to the victims is limited. There is also greater accountability, where the victims themselves may be able to demand feedback or demand response to the demands that they have been able to articulate more directly. So just saying that we don't know, or we are not able, or whatever good excuses may not be enough when the victims can directly voice their their needs and their concerns, and also a greater diversity of sources of information for greater reliability. We are able, new technologies give us greater perspective. We can use different sources to better understand the situation on the ground and therefore to compensate the bias that may exist if we use only one or limited sources of information. We can also cross-check or outsource use some computerized tool to cross-check the information obtained from different sources. So these are great opportunities to enhance our capacity to respond to the crisis. But obviously, there are also many challenges that need to be addressed. The protection of sources. How do we ensure that people who provide information are not put in danger because of that? So protecting the channels of information and also the way the information is stored. The loss of control over one's data. People may, in a situation of information, post some information on the internet. In a situation of emergency, they may post some information on the internet because they need an urgent response. But once the situation has subsided and is under control, they may not want to have their own information staying on the internet and available to whoever. There are crooks everywhere, and we've seen in many cases people who had put information because they were looking for missing person after the tsunami, for instance. They were afterwards contacted by crooks selling them supposed information as to the location of their relatives. So we need to ensure that people maintain some form of control over their data and that we don't abuse the data they've provided. As I mentioned before, the misuse of personal data, false expectations, also the risk that people think that because they can contact whoever across the world, they will receive an immediate response. It's unfortunately not always possible to provide that response. The question of informed consent. People provide information for a particular purpose, but we must make sure that if we use the information provided, we must make sure that we obtain their consent for that particular use. In particular, when we talk about nominal information, which means where we mention in particular the name or details that may contribute to the identification of that particular person. There we must make sure that the person consents to this use, and the fact that the information has been posted on the internet doesn't allow us to assume that there is an informed consent for whatever use we may consider. The question of reliability and bias. Sources of information on the ground may not be entirely representative of the whole population. There may be different access to technologies according to gender, according to locations, according to social status. There may be many factors. So the information that we receive by electronic means may not be entirely representative of the situation on the ground. There is a recent case that was mentioned to me of the many people talking in one particular context, many people talking about an epidemic of sexual violence because there have been many tweets about sexual violence in this context. That may not be representative of the situation on the ground. There is no doubt that there is sexual violence occurring, but does it represent the epidemic that is alleged? It's not always certain. So we have to be aware of them. We may not be able to have the full picture, but what is important is to factor the possible bias in our analysis to grade the information we have according to reliability and bias. Therefore, to be aware of the bias of the known unknowns that may affect the reliability of the information. Another challenge is the possibility of an asymmetric dialogue. So the victims on the ground can contact us directly, but we don't have the possibility to individually respond to each one. So how do we find an effective way to dialogue with the persons contacting us. This is an important way, not to be an important question. Sorry, not to be seen or not to just respond as a general communication and lose the direct contact. We have to include some form of direct dialogue with the victims, even if we are not able to respond to each and every call directly. The question of whether these new technologies in a way mean that we don't need to meet face-to-face on the field with the victims. And as I said earlier regarding the question of whether new technologies can replace direct access, in our perspective, obviously, we want to be able to maintain a direct contact with the victims, therefore to meet them face-to-face and listen to their needs and have a much more direct engagement with them. But and therefore we see these technologies more as a complement than a substitute. The question of the pressure to communicate, when you are faced with a flood of information, a flood of demands from the field, there may be a very strong pressure to respond and communicate immediately and publicly, while you are not fully yet able to give an informed answer. You've not been able to cross-check everything, and so this pressure can be quite difficult to manage. And this also links to information overload, where you are faced with enormous amount of information that we cannot humanly process, and therefore we need to have tools, computer tools, that can help us to process them and make a pre-selection or a pre-analysis. Otherwise, all this mass of information is entirely useless. Now, getting to the standards, there is one particular element. Before getting in the standards, we wanted to highlight something when a protection actor is considering the systematic data collection in a particular context, for instance, regarding violations of international law. Before you start this data collection, we think it's important to consider three essential questions. The first of all is the possible bias. What bias? How the information collection will be affected by bias because of the particular tools we will be using. As I mentioned earlier, the question of effective access to the different tools. People, according to many different factors, may not have the same access to these tools, so the information may be biased from the outset. So we will need to find some complement to be able to talk to those who don't have the same access to these tools. Otherwise, our data collection will not be very useful. The second question that we need to ask is what would be the risks for individuals, both those contributing data and those about whom information is provided. It's important, it's essential to do this risk assessment, because there also it will affect the way in which we collect the data. And finally, what is the intended use of the data? And we see two great categories of use of the data. First, it can be general work on awareness, working on trends, or the corroboration of other information, where you not necessarily need, or most probably you don't need, to collect individual information. So you can be more, the data management will be easier because you won't need these very specific security measures to protect nominal or individual information. You can collect data that is not, that doesn't include personal information. But if you want On the other hand, if you want to respond to specific events, to individual needs, you want to have a direct interaction with individuals to follow up their situation and their problems. There you will most certainly need to collect personal information, and there you will have to be extremely attentive to some security elements, the question of informed consent, data management, and that's much more difficult to do. So the challenges, you need to be able to face the particular challenges you will be exposed to. So these are the three questions that you need to consider before starting systematic data collection. And just an important remark, this is not only, it's not a new element linked to new technologies. It's something that is as true whether you are on the field using a network of volunteers with a pen and paper interviewing individuals, or if you are hundreds of kilometers away using the latest technologies. In all cases, you have to ask yourself these questions in order to determine how you will go and collect the information. What are the constraints? What are the security concerns you must take into account? But obviously, some particular challenge appear when you are far away and using new technologies. So I will very briefly have an overview of the key standards. I didn't put here the text of each standard, but I wanted to highlight the key elements included in the standards. And below each bullet point, I mentioned also the elements of reflections that Patrick contributed to in his post on his blog last week. The first question is the question of necessity and capacity. You must collect information only if it's really necessary and only if you have the capacity to properly manage it. And here, Patrick pointed out in his post, he pointed to the activation criteria of the crisis mappers that guarantee some form of necessity check, because the crisis mappers network is activated at the request of a humanitarian agency that must show that there is a particular necessity for the activation of the network. You must comply with the relevant data protection laws, international and national laws. And here, Patrick pointed out that, well, in order to be able to comply with that, we would need some user-friendly resource that give you some guidance as to what are the laws, the applicable laws. Well, that's an interesting question, and the problem is that the resource is missing for everyone, because it is still a very complicated field, because there are some elements of international law, but which is not necessarily complete. And national laws apply. Well, you have different national laws according to each country. All the national legislations are not consistent. And the particular problem when we talk about new technologies is that several jurisdictions may be overlapping. You have the jurisdiction of the country where you are collecting data, where the violations are occurring, or the particular humanitarian situation you are covering, the law applying in this particular country. There is the law of the place where the crisis mapping team is working, and more often than not, this means several countries because it's a worldwide network. There is the law of the country where the data is stored. There may be some other factors. So this is extremely complex, and we don't have yet a comprehensive response. So it is something we are working on with other actors, with the national data protection bodies, and it's still something that will need some development in the future. There is the essential question of do no harm. This is something transversal to all humanitarian and human rights activity. The first, as I mentioned in the introduction, our first concern must be not to do harm to the people we intend to help or to support. So this is a key concern that must be incorporated in the data management and the data collection. Here, Patrick referred to the prime directive of the crisis mappers, which is that you don't interact in principle with the victims on the ground. You work more with the humanitarian agency requesting your support, but don't interact with the victims on the ground to prevent the risk of doing harm. It may be a useful something useful, but it's probably not complete. The do no harm is probably much wider than that, and it's a reflection also that must be developed when we talk about a possible code of conduct for the crisis mapper. In particular, when we talk about individual data, reposting or retweeting or scrapping data from the internet that has been voluntarily posted by some victims, but we may not be sure as to what use they consent and what use they do not consent. The question of bias and non-discrimination, as I presented earlier, so it's essential to include a reflection on bias and non-discrimination in data collection and data management. And here, Patrick pointed to the question of objective, the impossibility to obtain objective information. Here, it's obvious that we never have objective information. We must factor the possible bias and the unreliability of the information. But the objectivity we talk about is the objectivity in the processing. We must ensure that we process the information as objectively as possible. So putting aside the possible prejudices or biases that we may have, and that we factor also the possible bias that affected the reliability of the information. Quality check and reliability, we must include in the data processing a way to check the quality of data and factor the possible bias. The question of data security, the way we store, we must guarantee that the information is properly stored and managed to ensure that nobody can have access to it irregularly, or that it can be leaked or lost in some way or another. And this is all the most important when we talk about data, personal data, data that identifies victims and witnesses. The question of informed consent, we must ensure that we obtain from the victims the consent for the use of the information, and it must be, and the key word here is informed. So the victim must, or the person providing information must really be put in a position to give a fully informed consent. So be aware of all the possible risks. What should will be done with this information, and this is an important challenge when we talk about the internet and new technologies, because I will be wrapping soon. It's the penultimate slide. I think it's almost finished. So we must ensure that we explain to the victims who have not been fully who don't fully master these new technology, what does it mean to put information on the internet or in some databases. We must make sure that they gain a sound of this understanding of these challenges, so that they are able to give their informed consent. We should strive to communicate with the victims and with the communities. It should not be a one-way information where the victims give us information and we treat it and do whatever we want with it. We must give some feedback and seek to communicate with these victims. And as far as possible, we should also promote cooperation and exchange of data with the due respect of informed consent and data security. So, well, this is not the most important part of the presentation. These are different bodies of standards for humanitarian work that are coherent amongst between them, and with which we hope to also be able to contribute to the development of the code of conduct for crisis mappers. Key challenges. The key challenge is that we should all bear in mind that an effective protection response demands adequate professional competence. The key challenge for the volunteer and technology community. Well, first of all, these documents, we are fully aware that the document is quite long and arid and difficult. So maybe some people's reaction will be, it's too long. I don't have time to read it. So give me something quicker. So that's the way we will have to work probably with the to develop a code of conduct that is more clear and accessible and responds directly to the needs of crisis mappers, and probably in the future with other developments of technologies, we will probably need to work on some updates. These very quickly, several NGOs or international actors or governments are now referring to the standards, so we hope they become a lively tool that is referred to in practice by all humanitarian and human rights actors. These are the key links for some other resources. You can find the PDF on the web, on our website, and on Scribd. You can also order copies of the print version in English. There will be a French version posted very soon, and we hope to have also the other languages available soon. We've also produced an e-learning which should be available on our learning platform, so everybody can log in and use the e-learning to go into more details of the standards and try to get to understand them more easily. We hope it's a useful tool, and let us know if you have some feedback. It will be very useful to improve this e-learning. There is the small manual we've produced, Enhancing Protection, that gives you more information on the way we see protection in ICRC, and also our website, familylinks.icrc.org, which is an example of the use by the ICRC of new technologies in situations of emergency to facilitate the restoration of family links between separated persons. Finally, that's the last one. We will be presenting the standards in Washington in May 2013, on the 9th of May, in an event organized with Interaction and UCIP. And we hope, if there is some interest on the crisis mappers side and the voluntary and technical community, we'd be happy to organize a side event on the new technologies, on the challenges, on these standards, and on the way ahead to produce a code of conduct. So thanks to all of you. I've been a bit much longer than expected. Sorry, I thought that would be shorter. But now I'm quite happy to give some response to any questions or dialogue, also to discuss your views. And
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, another quality presentation from Guilhem. Just to let you know, a few housekeeping items. We will be closing the room about 2 minutes after the presentation is done. And again, thank you all for joining us.